So this is a good time for you to take stock of the goals that you set at the beginning of the year and meet with your supervisor to discuss these things, and then think about how you can accomplish the goals that you set if they are still the most important, most impactful things for you to be working on. And don't be surprised if you don't get some guidance to change your goals a little bit, or maybe drop one and add another one, because this has been a whirlwind of a first and second quarter, hasn't it? So performance management is all about being aligned with the business, and so make sure that your goals are the same as your company's goals. And so the next document we'd like you to think about is a career development plan, and this is a more long-term document. A PMP is just for the year. It's what you start out in January saying you're going to be done by December, whereas career development is more about you, and it's more about how you're going to take the opportunities that you have to get experience and how you're going to use that to shoot for future jobs within your organization. And so you want to think about the short-term jobs that are reachable right now for you, or perhaps if you added a few skills, you might be able to compete for them. And then you want to think about the jobs that are maybe 2 levels above the level where you are now, and really chart the course for how you're going to get the experience to be able to compete for those higher jobs 5 years, 10 years down the road. And so that takes planning, and it takes dialogue. You need to discuss with your supervisor and your mentor and your sponsors those opportunities that are available to you to choose to work on different projects, to put your hand up for different types of opportunities. And in some cases, you're going to be purely technical. In some cases, you might look for some cross-disciplinary opportunities. And in some cases, it might be some supervisory opportunities as well. So write those down, put them into a career development plan that you can discuss with your supervisor and your mentors. The third document that I've noted here is a resume. And I think we all think of a yes.
Yes, so before we move over to the resume, I've got a quick question.
Yes.
How do you, so first of all, what should you do if an employer doesn't use a performance management plan or a career development plan? And then also, if they don't, how can you come up with that yourself? And then how can you, align yourself with, how can you find out your company's goals and then align yourself with your company's goals?
That's a lot of questions all at once, Mark. But let me start out by saying you don't have to have a corporate process to follow to be able to do this as an individual. And so it's sort of like when you set New Year's resolutions, you may set some goals for yourself related to your work. So that is essentially a performance management plan. And I think the key elements of a PMP are that your goals are SMART. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So as long as you can describe your goals with those characteristics, then you can write them down. And you can write this down on just a piece of paper, show it to your boss, and you have a plan. It's not that complicated. It doesn't have to be a sophisticated system, and it's really just an agreement between you and your supervisor. And the same thing with a career development plan. It's really thinking about long-term assignments and short-term assignments for which you want to become qualified. So it's all about getting the experience. Now, sometimes there might be a training class you could take or something that you could do in this year that might be particularly relevant to your career planning goals. And so then you want to include that in your PMP. And so that's why these two documents are related. But it doesn't have to be a big fancy system for it to work. So as an individual, it's just like setting New Year's resolutions. Think of it that way. It's your to-do list.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Sure. And then the resume comes into play. A lot of people think they only need a resume when they're looking for a job. But in reality, if you've done your PMP correctly each year, at the end of the year, what you've accomplished can be summed up in 2 or 3 bullets that can go into your resume. So every year you've looked at your key job responsibilities and you've measured what you've done, what you've accomplished, and then those can be turned into short bullets that can go into your resume. Now, if you do this every year, of course, your resume is going to get pretty long, and so eventually you're going to have to start summing up some of the less recent activities. But this gives you a really good system that every year you're updating your resume with your achievements, your accomplishments, the things that you've done that have been impactful to your company. And then it's easy once you start applying for a job, or even if you're looking outside externally for opportunities, you have an updated resume, at least within a year. And then the final thing to keep track of is your network. And since the advent of LinkedIn, that has become more easy to do, but for a lot of people, they may keep track of their key contacts, their sponsors, their mentors, people who have been past supervisors, people who know of them and could be good references. They keep track of that. Maybe it's in a spreadsheet. Maybe you have your Outlook contact list. Maybe it's LinkedIn. Maybe you have some other document that you use to keep track of your network. But think about your network with respect to how close they are to you. And reach out to people from time to time if you've lost track of them, if they've lost track of you. This is a great time to reach out and check on people to see how they're doing and let them know what you're up to, so that in the future, if you need to ask them for a reference, they'll be knowledgeable about what you've been doing.
And can you describe some ways that you've, obviously you're an excellent networker, some ways that you've networked, and what are some activities that, both professional and social, that obviously this is a networking function that people can network over? Right.
So the first thing I'll tell you is to volunteer within your professional society. So we are here at a meeting today that some people planned it, some people volunteered to be the moderators, and some other people signed up to attend. And so there's lots of opportunities within HGS, within APG, within SP, other professional societies. And don't just join the organizations, actually do something. Actually, take a leadership role, because that shared experience in planning activities will give you opportunities to come in contact with people and to learn about what they're doing. You might also meet people when you're taking training classes, when you're involved in other community organizations. There's a number of ways that you can become involved. I'm an advisory on the Petroleum External Advisory Committee of the Petroleum and Geosystems Engineering Department at University of Texas. So that's my alma mater. And so they've asked me to come back and give advice to students and faculty about the industry. And so we all have alma maters that we can stay connected to. I'm also involved with Colorado School of Mines, which is not where I went to school, but they asked me to also give them advice. So there's things that are easy and maybe a direct connection, and others where you have to get some sort of referral to become invited to those things. When you think about your network, think about the context of your network. Some people have you draw a diagram, and the diagram might look something like a family tree, or maybe it looks like orbits with you in the center and all these different circles around it. But diagnose your network for the strengths and the weaknesses. Maybe you haven't stayed in good contact with some of your high school friends, and so you'd want to reach back out to them and check in on them. They may be valuable opportunities for you.
That's an interesting point. Sorry to interrupt you. My dad mentioned something to me about my high school. Obviously, I'm over here, so I don't see most of my high school friends. And then I went on LinkedIn and I found, we call it secondary school. I found my secondary school on LinkedIn about 2 weeks ago, and they have a special interest group, or they have a private group. And so I reached out to everyone on the group. I just told them who I was, what year I went to school. And so I haven't done that at all, to be honest. I've been really bad about that. So, and a lot of the folks are in really great companies, really great positions, and I didn't I just touched in, and it was great. It showed me something about my school, because a lot of them asked me, well, how can I help you? And I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. You know, usually people aren't, that's not what people say when they reach out to you. But so, yeah, check, you know, look on Facebook, look on LinkedIn, if your high school has a group, and then the other groups that Susan mentioned.
That's right. You. That's right. And that's also the concept of reciprocity that I'll talk about again. But it's not just a one-way street. If you're looking to get someone to help you, be sure that you're willing to help them as well. So back to the career management, think about the opportunities that you have within your company, research the opportunities, read what your company is talking about with external press releases, the annual reports, those sorts of things, listen to the earnings call, and pay attention. Pay attention to where the money is being spent, because that's where the jobs are going to be. So look at the divisions that are getting all the budget, because that's where there's going to be opportunities. And then finally, as you're going through the career management process, don't forget to do a good job where you are right now. Don't always be looking for the next opportunity so much that you're not paying attention to business. And so make sure as you move into each new role that you understand the responsibilities, you know who the stakeholders are, you want to understand how your performance will be measured, and then make sure you deliver. Make sure you get everything done that needs to be done. And that's kind of a sliding challenge in today's environment with different oil prices than we started the year with, and of course COVID-19 has us all working from home most of the time, so that can be really challenging. So when we think about networking, let's talk about the value of networking, because even when you're not looking for a job, networking can help you get your job done. So many of us as engineers, we solve problems. And so sometimes you need some sort of information to be able to solve the problem. Maybe you need to speak to a subject matter expert. You need introductions to people that have solved these similar problems before. And I like this quote from Linus Pauling, as a Nobel Prize winner in 2 different disciplines. He said, the best way to have a good idea is to have a lot of ideas. So the bigger your network is, the more diverse it is, the more likely it is you're going to get different types of suggestions for how to do your job and solve problems. And we talked about the idea of reciprocity, making sure that you're offering to do something for someone else before you ask them to do something for you. And building that relationship, it's a two-way street. And particularly for the Neo Geos, I'd like to remind you that you have this innate need to join things. And so don't overcommit. You may find that you're wanting to join too many organizations and too many groups. And so pick the ones that you think will be most value added to your career. And I've listed some references down there, and I've put the references in the documentation. So I'll put them in the chat at the end, unless someone else can do that for me. So when we think about networking, as you're trying to analyze your network, you might think about it in 3 different forms. And the first column is operational. I think for all of us, this will be pretty familiar because it's the chain of command. It's the people to whom you report in your organization. In fact, if you drew an org chart, this would probably describe your organizational network. You have your peers, you have people to whom you report, you have the higher levels, and there may be some people that you supervise that you have control over as well. The middle column, the personal column, is also probably clear to most of us. We have our family, we have our college friends, we have high school friends, maybe you have neighbors, maybe you have your HGS friends, but your personal friends from different aspects of your life. But the last column, the strategic network, may not be something that you've thought about very carefully. And so think about, for instance, when we were talking about those PMP goals, the key job responsibilities that you have, who are the stakeholders, the people who could help you to accomplish those responsibilities, and what influence do they have? There may be a key manager who approves all your projects. There may be other people in other disciplines who give you support for your projects. So make sure you understand who all these people are and cultivate those relationships strategically, making sure that you're helping them with their projects and vice versa. So it's not always you asking for something, but it can go both ways. And so for a lot of us, we find the first two columns come naturally, but the strategic column probably needs some work. You probably need to think about that very specifically. So with social media, this is something that as we're locked down in COVID-19, we can use social media. And of course, with LinkedIn, you want to make sure it's updated, keep it current, have it consistent. It's not the same as your resume, but you don't want it to tell a different story than your resume. And in fact, LinkedIn can provide more information about your interests. You can post information, you can comment on technology or interesting developments. You can add links to the publications that you've written in your LinkedIn profile. You can provide recommendations to your colleagues, and you can request recommendations from your colleagues. You can follow companies that you're interested in to see what sort of announcements they make, and you can use LinkedIn for your contact list. You also want to pay attention to other social media, whether it's Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, other social media that you follow. Make sure that you're always thinking about it as a public platform. It's going to be there if someone goes looking for it. But it's a great source of information. You can follow industry news on many of these platforms, and you can use them to build your brand, to show your persona the things that interest you. So use social media to your advantage.
How do you stay on top of all the new social media platforms? I had someone tell me to focus on one and learn one. Everybody always, of course, sees me on LinkedIn. I've tried to do a little bit of Twitter. I don't do it as much. And even Casey and I were talking about Facebook. And, I used to do Facebook. I don't do it as much now. And then, of course, you've got TikTok and, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you stay on top of all of those?
Well, I don't think you can. So the answer is it's not possible. But choose the sources of information that you find to be relevant. And so you may find Twitter to be particularly relevant for announcements, things that are happening about mergers, things that are newsworthy. You may find, LinkedIn is better for understanding the people. Instagram is more about the media, the photos, so there's different ways that you can do different ones. And you can choose not to follow politics. You can choose not to follow things that might be controversial if you don't want to have that in your stream. So it's up to you how much time you want to spend. But I don't think it's possible to always keep up with all of them. I'd agree. That's all-consuming. But certainly for 15 minutes a day, it's probably time well spent, just to kind of check to see what's trending, what's the current news.
Okay.
So during the pandemic, how do we keep networking? Well, I provided some sources here because there's been a lot of media currently generated on this challenge. And to begin with, when you're reaching out to people, remember, things may not be good. They may have health situations in their family. They may have friends who've been laid off, family members who are impacted. And so be authentic. Don't always just cut straight to your business and check on their family first before you jump into the business. We're using video chats more often, so we can't always meet for coffee or a beer, but a video chat can be a good way to connect. And again, this concept of reciprocity, make sure that you're asking how you can help them just as much as you're asking them for favors. If you're trying to get in contact with someone and they're not replying, be patient, because we all have a lot of things we're worried about right now. Maybe, again, they have health issues, family members that are impacted. You may have to try again later. And for those of you who work in a service industry, don't always be making the sale. Don't always be calling to deliver business, but just check in on your clients and make sure they're okay. Build that relationship before you try to keep selling. Here are some other things that you can do during the pandemic from home. You can keep your LinkedIn profile updated. You can provide recommendations for your peers and colleagues. You can do some research on companies that you're interested in, contacts in those companies. You might ask for introductions to those strategic contacts. And certainly you want to put a thoughtful note when you're reaching out to them, not just making a cold contact to connect. We can attend webinars like this one. Here we are today talking about networking and career planning. And of course, there's always material that you can read that's relevant to our industry. So I thought these were all great things that we can do to keep up the networking during the pandemic.
So Susan, with regards to LinkedIn, do you think people should reach out to people they don't know? And if they do, how should they do that?
Well, I think everyone has their own perspective on that. And I can tell you some people set maybe rules for themselves. Like, for instance, when I was managing college recruiting for University of Texas at Chevron, I would not accept a request from a UT student because I didn't want to have any favoritism. So that was my personal rule, that I wasn't going to connect with the UT students because I was managing that recruiting team. And so understand that people may not accept your request if you haven't met them, if you don't know them. You might find, again, an introduction is a good way to get connected to someone, or just some sort of note about how you heard them speak at an exciting event, or you read a paper they wrote, something to show that you appreciate their contribution in the industry. That might increase your chances of someone accepting your connection request.
Yeah, I think I did that recently with someone. I was on Dr. Nash's AAPG Wednesday call, and I just did some research on one of the speakers. So everyone on the call, I think, in the audience was way more intelligent than I was, but the questions, they weren't asking any questions around the speaker on what he knew. And I kind of saw that, and I was like, well, let me just do some research on this speaker quickly and ask him some questions about what he's doing in his business.
Right.
I did, and then he reached out to me. He sent me a private message. He's like, "Hey, Mark, that was a great question." I was like, "Well, yeah, of course it was. It was from your paper, you know." And
exactly. Right.
And
right.
he sent me his email address. He told me to connect with him. My colleague just had coffee with him. He's in Colorado. My colleague just had coffee with him today. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, people love to talk about their work.
Super. Thank you.
It's always a good topic. Yes. So I think this is my final slide, but I want you to think about networking as being more involved in your professional society. So here's a plug for HGS and SPE, and participate, plan an event. Next week we have ERTEC coming up. That's a joint event between APG, SPE, and SEG, and it's all about unconventional reservoirs. And this is the first time ever it's been delivered virtually, so no travel involved, and you can have access to all the papers for 6 months. You can join a leadership team, volunteer for a role with responsibility. You can submit an abstract for a paper or write a paper. And make sure you diversify your network. Look for other groups, maybe than just HGS. Look for another group that you might find people that you have common interests, and ask for introductions to people that might be interesting. Read their papers, reach out to the authors, and always volunteer to help, because most committees don't have enough volunteers, and so you'll always find opportunities to get involved. And summertime is when many of these committees are in their planning phases, so this is a great time to volunteer.
Okay.
So here's my contact information. I put it in the chat in the beginning, and I'll put it again in the end, and I'll stop and take a pause for questions.
Okay, I'm going to kind of kick it off, but if anyone has any questions, please submit your questions in the chat. Other than the organizations you mentioned there, Susan, what other organizations do you recommend folks join to network?
Well, I think here in Houston we have so many good choices. It's really amazing. There's a number of groups that are involved with the Upstream hiring event. And if you haven't heard of that, this is something we started in SPE that is a hiring event here in Houston that involves 30 different professional societies. And we found groups that had engineers and geologists working together, but some of them have different missions. And so it might be, for instance, the Society of Women Engineers, and their mission is to bring more women into engineering. But I would look at that list of the 30 different societies that are supporting the Upstream Oil and Gas Professional Hiring event, because that's a great list of organizations to get involved in.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And then how do you, say you don't have a mentor, how do you find a mentor? That's part one. And then part two, what guidance can a mentor provide for your career navigation?
Well, I think, the whole topic about finding a mentor was actually when we first started developing this presentation on networking. We developed it with a combination of mentoring, and we did this for an SP annual meeting that was in Amsterdam, because in some companies, you're assigned a mentor as a new hire, but then after a couple of years, you move on, the mentor moves on, you get assigned to different groups. And you need to constantly be looking for your next mentor throughout your career. You never stop needing mentoring. And so the whole aspect of networking is very aligned with finding mentors for different topics. And maybe it's technical mentoring, maybe it's career coaching, maybe it's somebody outside your company that can have a non-biased perspective. But professional societies are a great place to find mentors if you don't find what you need within your company.
Thank you. What's the difference between looking for a job within the company as compared to an external search? And how can you touched on it in your talk, how can you maximize your opportunities in both realms?
Right. So some companies are very transparent in the positions that are being offered every year. And they have a job posting system. You can see what's available. And others, you may have to do some research. Even in your own company, you're going to have to go look for the positions that are going to become open. And so networking becomes important in that respect, to find out who's about to be reassigned, who's going to be moved, what areas are going to be open to new opportunity. And so within your own company, that may take some research. It may not be just posted on the internet, internal internet for you. And of course, outside your company, it's a little more complicated because you don't want your own company to know that you're looking. So you have to be a little stealthy there, but go to people you trust, talk to people who you can, get information from without them talking too much about you looking to leave your company.
Sure, fantastic. And then I really liked that diagnose your network concepts that you talked about. Can you recap that, maybe possibly go into a little bit more depth? Because I think that's something that we don't do, at least I don't do anyways, as often as I need to.
Right. So we usually do this exercise in the networking workshop where you start with a piece of paper and you put yourself in the center of the paper, and then you draw concentric circles and then slices of a pie, and one slice may be your family. And so the closest to your family are the members you live with, your immediate family unit. And then you may have your parents, your siblings, and then you may have cousins that are farther out. And so the distant relatives are at the outermost circle, and you can do the same sector analysis with each of your different categories of contacts. But again, you're looking for weakness. You're looking for areas, well, man, I haven't talked to those distant cousins since forever. Maybe I should reach out to them. And you're looking to improve the connections within your network. All of us have strongest connections with the most proximity, the people that we see most frequently. But it doesn't mean you can't maintain strong connections with people that live far away if you at least check in with them from time to time. And this is a great time. Everyone's checking in just to see how people are doing. So reach out to some people you haven't talked to in a while and check in with them.
Super. And so how did you get started in your career, and what some of, obviously, first of all, your presentation was fantastic. I really learned a lot. And yeah, so what are some best practices, just some, maybe 3 final key points that you would tell young professionals to implement or do during their career? I know I get those like 3-pronged questions all the time. Sorry.
That's all right. So I started out with Anadarko, the company formerly known as Anadarko, and I worked in the Denver office and moved to Houston. I started as a reservoir engineer and doing classical reservoir engineering for the most part, studies, economics, and then I transferred into a group where we did acquisitions and divestitures. And so then all of a sudden my network became really important because I needed to anticipate companies we would invite to our data rooms because I was in charge of selecting the potential buyers. And so I really needed to understand companies. And so my SPE contacts became very important at that point. And I started to really appreciate the value of having a network outside my company. And then I worked in a role where I was more involved with organizational capability at Anadarko, where I was working in the chief engineering group, developing all the training, and I really started to understand the career development aspects. I transferred over to Chevron, where I ran the Horizons program, and that was a much bigger company, much more organized with respect to the systems, but the concepts were the same. It was just involved many more people than we had at Anadarko. And so I learned how to scale it up, take it to a much larger group, 4,000 reservoir engineers and earth scientists, something like that. And so from there, I moved to SCA, and at SCA we offer training. We have over 80 different technical courses for earth scientists and engineers. We do consulting. In fact, the large part of our business right now is consulting because training's kind of slow with the lockdown. And we also do direct hire services. So I think all of my experiences have helped me in my current position at Subsurface Consultants and Associates.
Superb. And so tell us a little bit more about SCA and where you think members of the HGS young professionals can gain most value working with you or SCA.
So we have, for several years now, been running short webinars where we give a sample of the content that an instructor might teach in a 2 or 3 day class. And so we have these 1-hour webinars that are free. In fact, we have one coming up on Wednesday on machine learning with Dr. John Foster at the University of Texas. Free webinars where you can go learn a little bit about a topic that might help you make the case to your supervisor to take the class. And so we've recorded all these webinars, and so they're available on demand. There's probably over 20 of them now. I don't know the exact count, but they cover a number of different technical topics for engineers and geoscientists. And so that's certainly a resource that's available for anyone right now that's interested. We do offer technical classes. Traditionally, they've been in the face-to-face, in-person format, but recently we've been doing them in a online version, live online, we call it. And so, for instance, for one of our clients that has an office in Europe and an office in Texas, I won't tell you who it was, but we arranged for a 2-day class that was actually spread out over 3 mornings. And so they were able to have their European office and their Texas office together online for a class that was delivered virtually in-house for them, and everyone was working from home. And so there's a lot of functionality that we can do now to deliver training that wasn't as available, say, even 5 years ago. And
fantastic. Super. So we're going to wrap up with Susan. Susan, that was very informational. Thank you very much. I highly recommend, folks reach out to Susan if they want to learn more about, networking.